Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our next session in our One Step at a Time online information series. So today's session is called Supporting Your Teen with Grief and Bereavement, delivered by Conway Mind. Thank you so much for joining us. It's lovely to virtually meet you all. So my name is Hayley and this is my colleague Emma.
Hi everyone.
And we are both mental health and wellbeing practitioners in the young people's team here at Conway Mind. So today our session will be covering a range of topics, including what is grief. We'll be discussing some grief responses that people might experience. We'll be thinking about some of the practical considerations that we might want to take into account. We'll discuss some cultural traditions around bereavements, including funerals, and how should teenagers approach funerals? Should they go to funerals? What might that feel like for them? We'll talk a little bit about how grief possibly changes us, and then we'll have some tips on how to support your teen and also how to support yourself as well, because this is obviously a really difficult time for you too. And then we'll finish with some support organisations that we would like to signpost you to.
Okay, so just a quick introduction about Conway Mind and who we are and what we do. So we are a mental health support charity and organisation, and we provide support for both adults and young people from the age of 11 upwards, for those who live in Conway County. The support can include a mix of one-to-one and group support. So in terms of, we provide a mix of support, so it could be private counselling, which is for those aged 14 and above, and that's at the cost of £50 per session. We also have other options such as supportive self-help, which is free, and that's guided support, so frequent contact with a practitioner like ourselves, to look at a space to talk about, maybe anything that's on the mind, anything that's happening at that moment, and also strategies to cope with thoughts and feelings such as maybe anxiety, low mood, grief and bereavement, anger, just strategies to try and cope with those thoughts and feelings. We do also have support calls, so in a similar way, it's frequent check-in calls with a practitioner just to check in with how the person is doing, and to support them to work towards a goal that they set. It's very informal check-in calls, just an informal chat. We also do awareness talks, mental health awareness talks in some local secondary schools, just to normalise talking about mental health, because we appreciate that can be something that's incredibly difficult. And we also have other groups such as maybe coffee mornings, and we also have a physical kind of get active, encouraging physical movement, whether that's a gentle stroll along the promenade in Llandudno, or whether it's a bit more difficult perhaps, maybe going up Conway Mountain, so to try and meet a range of abilities. So yeah, we try and provide a mix of one-to-one and group support there.
So before we kind of dive into the topic of today, we just wanted to start off with a little reminder really about looking after yourself. Obviously, anything to do with our children can be really, really difficult for us to talk about and for us to think about. But then if we throw grief and bereavement into the mix, we're looking at a really difficult situation for us to think about. So please look after yourself today. If at any point you want to pause the video, take a break, of course, you're more than welcome to do that. Reach out to us, please, if you feel that you need to talk about any of your thoughts and feelings during this experience. So yeah, look after yourself the best you can. Obviously, we're not here to judge or evaluate anybody's parenting or any decisions that people make with their children. We really celebrate that diversity. Everybody parents differently, and that's one of the wonderful things about being human. So yeah, we just wanted to recognize at this junction, looking after yourself, do the best that you can today to take care of yourself. And on that note, really, just a little reminder as well, we'll be talking about a really difficult and emotional topic, but we think it's really important not to use euphemisms or to dodge the subject. When we're talking to our young people about grief and loss, we think it's really important to use clear, honest language. So we will be modelling that in this situation. So we'll try our hardest not to beat around the bush. We'll be really clear with what we're talking about today.
Okay, so now to open it up to the topic of the information session. So what is grief and what does that mean? So there is actually a quote. Our grief is defined as our reaction and emotional response to losing someone or something that we care about. So there are Absolutely, many different types of grief. Although we tend to believe that grief is, say, the loss of the death of a person, but actually could be many other things as well. So it could be the loss of a relationship, the breakdown of a relationship. It could be the loss of a job, leaving a job, and that kind of routine and structure that we had, that sort of life that we built. It could be a change in location, so moving to a different place. It could be loss of an object. It could also be the death of a pet. And it might even be we're noticing a change within ourselves, maybe our personality. Perhaps we used to be more outgoing than maybe we are nowadays. So that change within ourselves and that loss of who we used to be. And absolutely, so I mean, through this session presentation, we will um go from the perspective of looking at the death of a person, but that's just because generally that's the most common thing that people experience. But certainly the strategies and things we discuss can be applied to any other sort of, say, loss or grief that you may be experiencing. And it may not, and also some types of grief, it doesn't necessarily rely on kind of a previous connection to the thing or to whatever has been lost. We can have a range of different feelings that we may not be able to explain and don't know why. Do we just know this is how we're feeling with it, and that's absolutely okay. However you're feeling is okay. So just to ask a question, really, we ask you to pause here and if you'd like to, pause the video and just have a bit of reflection time, just to think about the question. So what does grief feel like for you? What do you notice that feels like? What does that mean to you? Specifically, perhaps what emotions or feelings do you notice that maybe you're feeling, or maybe you've noticed other people feeling as well? What might it look like? Kind of behaviors as well. What maybe is, again, yourself or others, how might they behave? What kind of signs might you notice if someone is struggling or has experienced maybe a bereavement? Maybe any thoughts as well that maybe come to mind in that time frame or that period of time? Or what sort of thoughts do you notice? Is there any pattern to that? Or what might someone be thinking? And also, you can also experience feelings in a physical way. So how have you noticed any sort of physical changes in yourself after the bereavement? And what does that feel like? Any physical sensations you might be experiencing? So yeah, so we ask you, if you'd like to, feel free to pause the video here and just have a think through those different points.
Okay, so in terms of the types of feelings that people might be experiencing after bereavement, now, as with most things related to bereavement, there are no right and wrong answers here. You might be feeling some of these feelings, none of them, all of them. You might feel them at different times. They might randomly pop up during your day. But in the kind of work that we do, these are the types of emotions that we kind of most regularly see associated with the bereavement. So immediately after a loss, we might go completely numb. We're going into that state of shock, as it says here, and we're just completely closing down and we're not feeling anything at all. We might be feeling, the emotion of anger, which might seem like a strange feeling to have in relation to a loss, but that feeling of this huge change has happened and it's completely outside of our control, that can bring up feelings of anger. We might be feeling guilty, either guilty that we didn't say the right thing or we didn't get a chance to say goodbye, maybe guilty of how come this has happened to them but not me. There could be a whole range of feelings of guilt involved in a loss. Sometimes there might also be a feeling of relief. If we have seen somebody suffer for a really, really long time in the build up to their passing, their eventual passing might have a sense of relief with that. But again, that sense of relief could then also be feeling connected to the sense of guilt as well. We might feel guilty for feeling relieved about this. There is probably going to be a really intense feeling of distress and sadness and just longing to be with that person. We might be experiencing resentment. That could be towards the person themselves who has passed. It might be to those around us. If we feel that we're not getting the right kind of support, if we feel that other people are not processing their grief in a similar way to you, that might feel a bit strange and a bit jarring, and that could bring up feelings of resentment, perhaps. We might experience loneliness, really deep, intense loneliness after a loss. We might start to reflect on actually how big of a part that person played in our lives, and we become even more aware of that sense of loss then. We might have a sense of regret. So regret, like we said before with the guilt, we didn't say the right thing, we didn't do the right thing. Did we get enough time together? We might regret the time that we did spend together. Did we really make the most of it when I was with that person? Did I really value and enjoy my time with them before they passed? We might be regretting the decisions that we've made. Sometimes, especially for teenagers, there can be a real sense of hopelessness because the finality of that loss can really hit us, and we can just feel like there's no hope that this is going to get any better. And that can then lead into feelings of low mood and depression. So we're feeling very, very down, really unmotivated. It's difficult to engage with anything in our lives. So for teenagers and young people, things like going to school, going to college, spending time with their family. So kind of coming out of their bedroom, spending time with the people in the house, or, socializing with their friends. That can be really difficult. We might also, in those early stages especially, experience a feeling of denial of, I'm just going to completely block this, and if I can push it away hard enough and fast enough, it's not going to be happening. That can be right in those very, very initial stages of grief, that sense of denial. And that can also go in with a feeling of bargaining as well. If I do such and such, this is going to change the situation. And we're going through these senses of bargaining, of trying to change the situation, of denial. We're going to come up against those emotions right at the beginning before we then lead into these feelings of longing and distress and sadness. In terms of our behavior, so once we've got these feelings, chances are they're going to impact on the things that we actually do in our day-to-day lives. So we're probably going to become quite withdrawn, quite isolated. We see that a lot with teenagers in general. Life as a teenager, they want to spend all their time in their bedroom. They want to be on their tablet or on their computer. And then if we throw a bereavement into it, that sense of withdrawing from family life and that sense of being isolated can really exacerbate that. Living on autopilot. So like we said before, that feeling of going numb, we go into survival mode. I'm just trying to get through every single day, just trying to get to the end of the day in one piece. And that can feed into this experience of living on autopilot. I get up, I get ready in the morning, I go to school, I come home, I eat, I go to bed. Next day the same, next day the same. And that can be a real coping strategy for a lot of people to try and just survive those early stages of grief. Crying a lot, that's going to be a very big part of bereavement. And sometimes we can be really good at giving ourselves permission to cry. And sometimes we feel like I can't allow myself to cry, to express it. Sometimes we feel that if we start crying, we're never going to be able to stop. So it's almost easier to hold those tears back. Don't let the walls down, keep it up, keep nice and strong. We've got to get through this. We go into practical mode and we can really hold those tears at bay. And yeah, that can, or we might go the opposite way and we might be crying a lot all the time. Any tiny little thing might kind of trigger those tears to come. We might also notice changes in our appetite, being either a lot more hungry than we normally would be, or not wanting to eat at all, kind of either ends of that spectrum, and also with our sleep pattern as well. So we might find that we can go to sleep, okay, but then we're waking up quite a lot during the night. Or we find that we're not getting to sleep until the early hours of the morning. We might find that our sleep pattern kind of does a bit of a flip, and we tend to be awake a lot in the night, and then we oversleep in the daytime, which obviously when our teenagers have got to get to school and they've got to get to college, that can be really difficult, that sense of not having a stable sleep pattern. We might find that some people react to bereavement by becoming quite hyper in terms of their activity levels. So they become quite restless. So that jittery leg going all the time, here, there, and everywhere. That can be a sense of the stress that's kind of building up internally kind of comes out. We might be kind of doing this a lot, we're moving a lot, and that's because the stress is kind of coming out of us and being manifested in these kind of physical movements. We might experience real extreme feelings of upset. So like we were saying before, those signs and symptoms of low mood and depression, of just not wanting to do anything. Even having a shower can feel like a mountain to climb sometimes. We might also notice that our young people are struggling with separation anxiety after a bereavement. So that sense of, or maybe the realization for a teenager of, we're not all here forever. And it can really trigger that feeling of, oh gosh, if I leave mum or dad, who knows what's going to happen to them today? So we might find that they become a little bit more strongly attached to us. And that can be difficult for us as parents and guardians to kind of try to moderate that and encourage them to be independent, whilst also giving them, obviously, that sense of comfort that they're really craving at the moment. We might find after a bereavement that we are seeing a lot more challenging behaviour in our teenagers and our young people. That can be at school. So all of a sudden we might have our child who's normally really well behaved in school, attendance is going really well, and all of a sudden there's a big change. We're starting to notice they're being a lot more disruptive in school, finding it difficult to even get in the morning or wanting to come home part way through the day. And that can really tie in with the mood swings as well. So we might feel like, oh, you know what? I think they're doing quite well at the minute. They seem to be on a really, on a good track now. Things seem to be really improving. And then before we know it, poof, we go back down again. And that can be, part and parcel of just being a teenager in general. Our hormones are all over the place. We're really, really feeling everything. We're really sensitive to what's happening around us. And then again, like we keep saying, being a teenager is really hard. And then we throw bereavement into the mix. And yeah, we're really starting to get that sense of these big mood swings. And we might also notice that our young people have a sense of regression as well. So maybe more childlike behaviours. That could just be something as simple as they just become really cuddly all of a sudden. They really value that time on the sofa together, watching TV together. Maybe starting to use maybe kind of a bit of a baby voice perhaps, or just needing a lot more support. So things in like getting ready for school in the morning. Normally they would be quite happy to get up, get dressed, do their own teeth and what have you. And all of a sudden we're noticing they're needing a little bit more help in areas that they're normally quite independent with.
Okay, and some examples of some thoughts that people might experience or have after a bereavement. So, and again, it's not to say this is exactly what people should be thinking or an exhaustive list at all. This is just some examples. So it could be, I should have said this, or I should have said something different. I should have done something different. That sense of guilt and kind of that anger, frustration at ourselves that we should have done something different. Or it could be more that longing. I wish I could see them again or speak to them again. And even anger, frustration at ourselves. So why am I feeling like this? I should be okay. I shouldn't be feeling this way. It's wrong. So like we mentioned before, if we are feeling, say, angry, we might think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling angry. Why? That's wrong. Why am I feeling like this? But however you're feeling is okay. There's no right or wrong or kind of manual to grief or bereavement. What you're feeling is okay. Could be expectation and pressure on ourselves. So I should just get on with it. Everyone just is kind of getting on with life. I should just keep going and just get on with it. That could also be linked to sort of shame as well. Grief can be something that's quite scary to talk about, and we might just pressure ourselves that we shouldn't talk about this with anyone, and kind of maybe scared about burdening them. We should just get on with it. Feeling lonely, so the feeling that we're isolated, so I'm on my own getting through this, or in the sense of unfairness, so it's not fair. Why has this happened? Why did they have to die? And also, if were they in pain? How did it happen? What were they thinking at those end moments? And that sense of just despair. I can't cope without them. I can't do this. What can I do? And sometimes, thoughts and feelings may be just randomly triggered by things such as maybe a certain smell we suddenly have or we sense. Could be a certain taste or maybe a certain site or place maybe we go to that just sort of triggers a memory of the person. And that could be quite random. And even many years down the line, we may notice, we might also have the thought that we believe that we're seeing them kind of around just in a random place. Maybe we're in the supermarket and we think, oh, that's them. I'm sure I just saw them. When we know really that that's not possible. And that certainly is something that people experience. I mean, we do say that if that becomes quite frequent and maybe those kind of triggers and thoughts and flashbacks maybe become a bit distressing, then it may be at that point, maybe seeking support from someone like the GP and having a chat with them about what's going on. Yeah, so just some examples of some thoughts that people may be experiencing, and you know, this is all a really normal part of grieving any of these sorts of thoughts. So also some physical sensations we may have, like we said, some with and anything we might be experiencing, we may express it in a physical way. So we might feel, say, sick or have a bit of an upset stomach, maybe an unsettled stomach. We might just feel completely drained and exhausted from just having to get through day to day and doing what we need to do, just living and surviving, just feel completely exhausted. Just adjusting to this new life we found ourselves in. It could also be maybe headaches or maybe even migraines. Aches and pains, you might just notice our joints feel quite achy. It's more difficult to move about and get up, maybe out of the chair or just get out of bed. And we might also notice a tightness in our chest, or maybe we notice we're taking more quick, shallow breaths rather than an actual what we need, kind of deeper, calmer breaths, just getting the oxygen into our body and our lungs. So there's a few different ways that people may express or experience grief in a physical way as well as on top of maybe thoughts and feelings. So again, I throw this question out to you all. Again, at this point, please feel free to pause this video and have a bit of reflection time for this question. You certainly don't have to, but that option is there. Just think of what do you think are the signs that someone is struggling? What might it look like, whether for yourself or someone else? What are the signs maybe we should look out for if someone is struggling after a bereavement? What might it look like? So, again, as we said, it may be, as Harry said before, it could be a change in their behaviour. Maybe they used to be really quite extroverted and quite outgoing and sociable, and then all of a sudden they're just not really wanting to leave the room or the house or really speak to anyone, even family, maybe not just not speak to anyone. So that just that real noticeable change in their behaviour. It may be that sense of anxiety about being separated from you and leaving you, kind of what if I leave you, what's going to happen? I can't protect you, that fear about what's going to happen. And they might also behave as if they're younger. So it may be they maybe start wetting the bed, maybe they start sucking the thumb. Things they used to do perhaps at a younger age, you notice those things coming back a little bit, they turn the kind of the grass and turn back to that sort of comfort of that time. It could be again a preoccupation with death or dying, that is something such as someone's maybe injured the leg. Instantly that means that something bad is going to happen, they're going to die. Just having that association that death or dying, what does it mean, and what's going to happen to everyone around me and myself as well. Also, finally, in terms of illness, so it could be they might be just exhausted and maybe an upset stomach, just generally from managing the thoughts and feelings that are happening and just being out and about in daily life. But it may also be linked to a way to process the thoughts and feelings. So it could be perhaps a preoccupation with the illness that the person died from. It may be they say they're experiencing similar symptoms of illness that the person died from as well, or having those similar symptoms. So it could be just that link of that preoccupation of that illness that that person had and experiencing those similar ideas. And yeah, so as I say, and again, not to say that that's an exhaustive list, there may certainly be other ways that people may try and cope and display those thoughts and feelings. They are just some examples of how people may try to cope.
Okay, so now we're going to have a look at different ways that people respond to grief. So I'm sure at some point you might have heard of the different stages of grief, but it can be useful to think of bereavement and grief as a journey. So you might not experience all of these different stages. You probably won't experience them as a linear journey. So I go from one to the other to the other. Chances are, when we have a bereavement, we're going to move back and forth. We might experience multiple stages at the same time. Um, yeah, there's no set path for how we're going to process and move through our sense of loss. So even though we have the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, certainly, like we said before, it's not linear. So we might experience a feeling of shock. So in this stage, like we said before, we're having that sense of numbness, that disbelief. It might be really hard for us to process and to understand what has actually happened to us. We might have a feeling of separation. So once that initial feeling of numbness has kind of started to recede a bit, we're just missing that person so desperately, and we really, really want to see them. We really want to talk to them, give them a hug. And that feeling of longing to see them can be really, really difficult. We might, as we said before, then move into that feeling of despair. So those really intense emotions of sadness and hopelessness. We might feel, as it says here, like there's nothing to look forward to. There's nothing to take any kind of pleasure from. That might then trigger feelings of anger, either towards the person who's passed. We might feel angry at ourselves. We might feel angry at those around us. Yeah, like a whole range of really, really difficult feelings in this stage. Hopefully, as time passes, we will then move into the stage of acceptance, where we start to come to terms with our loss. We're starting to let the dust settle. We're starting to, okay, this is what's happened. This is where I'm up to. We're not going to be happy about it by any means, but there might be, hopefully, just a sense of this is part of the journey. This is the next step that I'm moving on to. And finally, this stage of adjustment. So learning to live with that loss. How do we incorporate that into our life on a daily basis? And certainly when we get to the adjustment stage, that's not to say that, we've moved past the sadness or we've moved past that sense of longing. We're still going to have those, but we've got to the point where our life has started to adjust and to grow around our grief. So when we experience a bereavement, we have all different types of responses that we might have. So we could have really intense grief. So grief which is constant and it's immediate and there's no let up from it. And these can trigger kind of really unprovoked bursts of really intense feelings. So we might feel like, oh, I'm starting, like we said before, starting to feel like I'm getting back on track. And then all of a sudden, it's like the rug gets pulled out from underneath us and it feels like we've come back to square one. We might have something called reawakened grief, where we feel like we're kind of, again, doing really, really well. And this can come back even years later, where we are kind of on the track, we are moving through life, we're going through the stages of grief. And years later, it can be like, wow, this has just hit me like a ton of bricks all of a sudden. We could have, again, this is a delayed grief. So a sense that we don't go through any of those stages at the beginning. We stay in that stage of numbness and shock. We can stay in that for a really long time. And for a lot of people, that can be how we deal with it. We go into survival mode. We go into practical mode. We try and turn down the emotions so that we can just get through each day. I'm just living, I'm surviving. I'm trying to just survive this situation. And then months, weeks, years later, it hits us. And we might also experience something called anticipatory grief. So especially when we know that a person in our life is going to pass, we might pre-grieve their loss before they have actually passed. And this can be really difficult because in some ways you feel like I've got to grieve that person twice. I'm grieving them before they've passed, and then I'm grieving them again afterwards. We might experience something called disenfranchised grief. And this can happen when we lose somebody important to us, but we feel like we can't say that out loud. We can't externally express those feelings of loss. For whatever reason, that could be because of stigma. We might feel like, oh, people don't even think I was that close to them, so I don't have a right to grieve that person. So, for example, when a celebrity passed. So recently, Liam Payne from One Direction, some people have really, really intense feelings of grief when a celebrity passes because they have that sense of connection there. But we feel like we can't say that out loud because what will people think? People might think, oh, I've never even met him. How can I possibly be so upset about this? But those feelings that we're experiencing are true to us. So, we need to try and honor that and to recognize, okay, maybe logically it might be difficult to say that out loud, but we're still feeling those emotions. So we can still honor and respect the fact that we're feeling a sense of grief, even if maybe we don't understand it very well. And we can also experience secondary loss. So the loss of a person or the loss of a thing can then lead to the loss of other things. So, for example, your living situation or your household income, perhaps, or you might lose a sense of purpose. If you've been a carer for a really long time, and then you lose that person, you're kind of losing a sense of your identity along with that too. So that can be secondary loss. We might also experience something called collective grief. So that's when a kind of community has a loss. So for example, with like a public figure, we were thinking of when, Queen Elizabeth died, that sense of, a community all grieving together.
Okay, and there is actually something called complex grief. So just a quote from Cruise Bereavement Support, which defines it as prolonged grief disorder or complicated grief, is when an intense, long-lasting symptoms of grief, together with other ongoing problems and difficulties coping with life, and that goes on for more than 6 months after someone has died. So that's sort of still severity feelings continuing for quite a long period of time. As we've said, however, or whatever you're feeling, that is okay and that is right for you. And there's no, right time frame or right or wrong way to feel with kind of the death of something or someone. However you're feeling, that's right for you. And there's, as I said, no time or set schedule. Just making sure you take one step at a time and do things when you feel able and comfortable to, not putting any pressure on yourself.
Okay, so now we just wanted to take a little bit of time to reflect really on how you might feel if you found yourself in a similar situation like this. So we've come up with a made-up scenario that we're going to read out to you, and then we're just going to ask you just a couple of reflection points, really. So how would you feel if this situation happened to you? So the scenario that we've got is a close family friend has died after an illness. Your team came with you to the funeral to say goodbye. A few weeks have gone by and they have become increasingly low and withdrawn. They don't want to talk about your friend and they leave the room whenever anyone mentions them. You've noticed that your teen is becoming more clingy and wants to come with you wherever you go. They seem really emotional and they need repeated reassurance that everything is going to be okay. One day, their sibling breaks their leg and has to go to hospital. Your teen seems really panicky and they start pacing the floor. So if you want to, again, there's, the opportunity here to kind of pause the video, have a little bit of thinking time. But in this kind of situation, what might be your initial reaction? How confident would you feel dealing with this kind of situation? How would you approach your teenager? So would you ask to sit down with them? What words would you actually say to them? How would you be feeling in this kind of situation? Would you be feeling a bit lost? Obviously, you've had a bereavement too in this situation, so you're processing your own feelings of loss and grief. And how do you think your teenager might be feeling? And obviously any other thoughts along the way. And you're more than welcome if you want to contact us with some of your thoughts and reflections on this, then yeah, hopefully that would be just a nice opportunity to kind of think about what this might feel like in real life.
So just to cover some practical considerations and different factors of grief and bereavement. So there may be some different factors that influence or impact kind of our response and how we cope. So it could be the context of the time when the bereavement happens. So it could be, for example, like with COVID, kind of maybe a lack of closure, not being able to say goodbye or care for someone as you kind of pictured or maybe hoped that you would be able to at that time. And also with that restricted contact at that time as well, and that adjustment we had to make for funerals and those last times of contact. So it could also be how the person passed. Maybe it was sudden or traumatic, and that certainly could impact kind of how we process that situation and what's happened. And also if it is traumatic, and maybe if it's against sort of the general cycle that we believe will happen. So say if a parent's died or a child has died and you don't expect that sort of thing to happen, you expect to maybe outlive a young person, or it maybe however it might happen, it just the situation wasn't as you generally you imagine a death would happen that way. It could also be, say, the attitude of society. So maybe that, as we mentioned before, that maybe sort of stigma or kind of taboo around talking about death, and maybe that expectation we feel that we should just get on with it. We just kind of carry on and keep working or doing whatever we're doing. Just you have to keep going. So it could also be certain in terms of personality. So how that person generally, their characteristics and how they generally cope with any sort of maybe stress or some kind of stressful situation like that. How do they normally cope? Do they have their own sort of toolkit and strategies that they have themselves and use? And the next thing, we will discuss this in a bit more next, was in terms of culture and beliefs. So for some cultures, it may be a kind of a celebratory time, celebrating a joyful time of celebrating the life of that person. But for others, it could be also a more somber affair, a more reflective time, and having and the different types of beliefs of whether it's say reincarnation or the finality of death, and just different ideas and values that different beliefs and cultures may have around death and what that means. It could be the relationship you had with that person. So as we said, it may be that we don't necessarily have to have a kind of a pre connection or sort of involvement with that person. May feel strong emotions and we don't know why, and that's okay. But it may also be that actually it's a close person and we have incredibly strong feelings when something like that has happened or something's happened with them. It could be past experiences of bereavement. Have we had any experiences like that before? And it's not to say that we'll respond to each bereavement the same way each time. We may respond in different ways each time. But just that awareness and knowledge about how we are in that time, how we cope, and also that knowledge that we can get through that kind of difficult time period. We can get through that. Maybe who we can turn to. It's just that maybe a difference in awareness or knowledge about what this means. And linked to that also is kind of age and maturity. So different age groups may have different again awareness or knowledge and ability to process what grief or death is, kind of the finality of that and how they process what's happened, and how we maybe share that with them and answer their questions. And finally, maybe the person's mental health and well-being at that time. If someone is feeling maybe a bit unsettled or a bit overwhelmed already at that time, this may just be just an extra thing that makes it just impossible, feels impossible to cope and get through that time. Or it could be if someone is feeling quite stable and supported at that time, they may feel, yes, it's distressing and devastating, but they know they have support around them and the things they can do to cope, and having that awareness. So just to give an idea of the different factors that may influence how we may respond or cope with a bereavement and grief. And in terms of, as we said, to talk a bit more about the cultures and cuisines, so there are many different ceremonies and traditions that cultures have associated with death. And these can be really, really important to help us actually process any thoughts and feelings that we might be experiencing. And if we don't get to have that, that can also have an impact on how we process and respond to the grief. It may be we notice we're really struggling with that even many years down the line if we haven't had the opportunity to process that and reflect on those feelings and express those at that point. So it could be, for example, Western societies tend to hold a funeral which involves sort of a coffin, flowers being put on top of the coffin, a eulogy being read out during the funeral. And it could also be whether it's a burial, whether it's a cremation, depending on the person's wishes, if they've been able to share those. And also if there is a wake afterwards and people coming together afterwards. But also in a different belief with Orthodox Judaism, that they actually have four distinct periods of mourning, different periods of mourning following the death of a person. And their belief and value is that the body of a person shouldn't be left unattended after the death. And someone should be with them, a family member. And yet again, a different belief, so Hinduism believes in that reincarnation, a cycle of rebirth, so the person coming back to life in another form. And there is usually a chief mourner that is there, and typically that is a male elder relative in the family, and that chief mourner will shave their head, and the immediate close family network for that following year after the death will reduce their social activities and focus on having that, supporting each other and being together and placing that value on that time of being together instead. And as we said, so this is a really important point of actually expressing and processing these thoughts and feelings that people might be having. And it could be really important to discuss with the young person actually what are they thinking? What do they feel about a funeral? Do they know what a funeral is? Have they been to one before? And kind of maybe are there any alternatives they could consider at that time of ways of processing those feelings? Have which it can be incredibly difficult, but starting that conversation with them about what is happening for them, what are their thoughts right now?
So, as Emma was saying right there, so that element of a funeral can be really integral to how some people process their grief. And I know that in difficult times, like after a bereavement, we might be really seeking those kind of clear black and white answers. Should my teenager attend a funeral? Yes or no? And I know it can be really difficult to make that call. And I'm really sorry to say that it is a grey area. There are no clear answers on whether or not someone should attend a funeral. But as we were saying then, it's really important to talk through that decision-making process with the young person, to take their thoughts and feelings into consideration. So, when we're having these kinds of conversations, some of the things that we might want to consider, how are they coping right now? Are they able to function on a day-to-day basis? If they are coping pretty well and you decide that they're going to go to the funeral, how will they feel witnessing other people being distressed? Because that can be really, really difficult. If we're trying to hold our own emotions together and then we see other people, especially family members, really outwardly expressing their grief, that can come as quite a shock to some young people, because we tend to see our elders as really strong, really stable. We've got everything together. We know what we're doing. And for young people to see, particularly older relatives, really, really in the depths of their pain, that can be really, really difficult for young people. Do they know what a funeral involves? Do they know what the procedures are going to be on the day? What's actually going to happen? Is there any way that we can try and preempt and prepare them for some of that? So could we talk them through, okay, This is what a funeral is. This is what happens on the day. That could even involve maybe going to see the graveyard beforehand to say, okay, this is the place we're going to come. This is what's going to happen. This is where we'll stand. Chances are people will stand around in this kind of pattern. Could we also go to the venue maybe for where the ceremony will take place so they can just get used to it? We have got some really good videos that we will link in the description box that explain to young people this is what happens during a funeral, so that they can kind of know beforehand, and really arm themselves with as much information as possible so that they can make that decision as to whether or not they want to attend. It's also really worthwhile taking into account what was their relationship like with the deceased. We hope that there will be a really, positive, good relationship there. But what if it wasn't like that? What if they had a really difficult relationship with the person that's passed? That's going to add an extra layer of really difficult emotions on the day of the funeral. Thinking as well, who is going to be in their support network on the day of the funeral? So if you as a caregiver are going to be really, really struggling with your emotions on the day, maybe just identifying, okay, you can go to so and so instead. So if I'm really, really finding it hard and I can't support my teenager right in that moment, which is absolutely fine, we know that you can go to your cousin, or you can go to, your auntie or your uncle. There's somebody there that you can go to. And just identifying for the young person, okay, this is going to be your little club on the day of the funeral. This is who's going to really be looking out for you. And we've got a little quote here from the organisation Child Bereavement UK, that talks about, how do we tell somebody that there's been a bereavement and when do we tell them? So the quote is, telling a child of any age that someone has died should be done as soon as possible, ideally by someone who is closest to them. Use clear, age-appropriate language and avoid words and phrases like gone or passed away, which might be really confusing for children.
Okay, so grief can have many different impacts, and this is just to look at how it might change us and what might happen for us. So, as I say, several different aspects. So it could be an impact on our social identity and our social kind of behavior and pattern that we already have. So it could be maybe a change in our kind of status or role. Perhaps we've changed friendship group, or maybe we're now more involved in a certain role, maybe more childcare than we used to do, just a change in our pattern and who our network is. Could also be practical, so perhaps we may have to make a new arrangement. Maybe now we're more responsible for financial issues, and maybe someone else used to deal with that somewhat, or maybe in terms of looking after the house, maybe we have to ask for help a bit more. Just changing in practical issues and how we solve that and how we live with that. Could also be intellectual. So it's when a bereavement happens, it can be a real threat to the structure of our day and our life that we have. So, and also in terms of our kind of our self-identity and our worth. So building that new independence and new life that maybe we've not had to do before. And as we said, adjusting to this new life we found ourselves in and building that independence and confidence. It would also be spiritual. So it may it may it may it may lead to us questioning kind of what is the meaning of life? Who am I? What am I doing here? What is my purpose? Maybe even questioning sort of our faith and our belief, and what that means for us. And just questioning that sort of that crisis in life. What does this mean now? Could be emotional. Again, we may have we may be experiencing really strong emotions, and it may be completely feel out of control with our emotions, and we just don't know why. Could be behavioural, so it may be a change in our behaviours or building a sort of new pattern or kind of new routine. In terms of cognitive, again, that's sort of questioning our self-identity and self-worth and what we think about ourselves and how, if we believe we can cope. And again, physically, so are we having any physical sort of expressions of grief and death or illness? Kind of how are we coping with our physical health as well and the impact grief may have on that, and what are we doing to help that? And issues like illnesses related to stress as well we may have. So it may also lead us to question our own mortality and also the mortality of others. So kind of what is going to happen to us and to other people, you know, how long are they going to live? Are they going to live? Is something going to happen to them in the next hour, in the next week? Kind of what is going to happen? And with that, there may come a few different things that may be reassurance seeking. So it might be that we're frequently, the young person frequently questioning kind of, are you going to be okay? Where are you? Where are you going to go? Who are you with? Can I come with you? So that we're needing that frequent, constant reassurance that that you're safe, things are okay. And although it may give short-term relief, long-term may be really, really difficult to learn to cope with those feelings if we're constantly providing reassurance. Just adjusting to that knowledge that generally things are safe and things are okay. Generally, you will be okay. So we also may have separation anxiety, so that fear about being away from you, and just constantly wanting to know where you are or being with you. And with this, it may be considering something like a really gradual approach. So gradually building up the time that you're apart, but so it might be starting with just going to make a drink in a different room, being separate, and then coming back together. To then maybe stepping outside in the garden or outside the door for 5 minutes and then coming back. And gradually building that time to 10, 15 minutes, going to the supermarket, the shop, and coming back. And gradually building that time apart to begin to feel used to, yeah, having that feeling and being by ourselves again, and how that feels. And again, thinking about death or dying, that preoccupation about what does death mean, and what do we believe that means, and what happens, what do we think, and it may be that that becomes a feature of everyday thoughts, and we may link that to everyday normal worries and fears, which, you know, is everyone has worries and fears sometimes. That's absolutely okay, but it may just be that if it becomes that sort of really snowballs and grows, so that we start believing that, say, as someone injures their ankle, and that means the young person thinks, oh, they're going to die, something bad is going to happen. If maybe we start to notice that, then maybe it's having that conversation is support something that they've considered or would consider, or an option maybe. And just to, a quote on the screen there, so to kind of demonstrate what grief may mean if that happens, that bereavement. So that ground is shifted beneath us and we feel fundamentally unsafe. And that's what this is about. That's it. And already, if someone, during that period of so many changes, like we said, of finding ourselves, our own identity, our worth, our bodily changes through puberty, and for an extra thing like this to happen can completely shake our foundations. So it's understandable that they are trying to seek reassurance and kind of gain control back in life again in something that's just completely out of control. But certainly, so yeah, these are just some ways that they may express and try and cope with those thoughts and feelings, and having that discussion with them can be really important.
So yeah, I mean, as Emma was saying there, you know, being a teenager is really tough, and then we add in grief and loss, and it's even harder. And then if we are facing a situation where we've had a traumatic bereavement, that's adding an extra layer of distress again. Responses to a traumatic bereavement can be incredibly overwhelming and incredibly distressing. So we've got a quote here from Crew's Bereavement Support. So traumatic bereavement may include dying in an accident, by suicide, through drugs and alcohol, or as a result of violence. But trauma can also happen after any sudden or unexpected death, or where you have witnessed someone suffering or in pain. So we felt it was really important to put this here just to recognize that, any form of bereavement is really difficult. But if we add in this extra element of this traumatic bereavement, then yeah, this is where we would be seeing those really overwhelming feelings of distress. And as we were saying earlier, so when we had that journey, the different stages of grief, and we came to that sense of adjustment. So this is a nice model that we use sometimes, and it's from the organisation Cruise. And again, all of the links will be in the description box below, so you can have a proper look through and kind of learn a little bit more about this if you think it would be relevant. But there's that sense of grief will always be there with us, and it's not that we're trying to make grief smaller. The grief will always still stay the same size in some ways. We will always miss that person. We will always long to see them again. We will always think to ourselves, I wonder if I had said something different or done something different. But what we hope is that over time, we will be able to grow around our grief. Life will continue to move forward. We will continue to meet new people, have new experiences, go new places. That will not diminish or take away the love and the care that we had for that person. They will always be a huge part of our lives. Our life will grow around that. So yeah, it's not about forgetting them. It's not about moving on and pretending that they were never there. We want to respect and honor the importance of that person in our lives, whilst also giving ourselves the opportunity to carry on living and to grow around that experience.
Okay, so some tips around supporting your teen and young person. So, one big thing is not assuming that you know how they feel, and everyone responds and copes with the death and grief in very different ways. So it's having that conversation with them. What is it? How are they feeling? We can't assume that we know what is going on for them and what thoughts are going on inside. Also listening. We may put a lot of pressure on ourselves to find a solution, to be doing something, to do the right thing. And yes, that may be the helpful thing, but also it can also be helpful just having someone to listen, just being there, just letting you know that you're there and a listening ear. Sometimes that can be just as or more helpful, just knowing that someone is there to listen rather than finding a solution. Making that first step of talking about maybe memories about that person, bringing that person up, or talking about how you're feeling as well and sharing that and showing that it's okay to have these feelings, you're having them as well, it's normal. Because and making that first step can be really important because they may be scared to say anything of how they're feeling or talk about the person, even though they might want to, because they don't want to distress or upset you or anger you or whatever that might be. They don't want to cause any upset for you by bringing those feelings or that person up. So you making that first step can perhaps make a big change. And also not putting any pressure on either yourself or the young person, just taking, as we said, one day, one step at a time, and not pushing yourself to do anything that you don't feel comfortable to, and just whenever you feel able to, making those steps. So whether it might be talking to someone or whatever that might be. And also, as we have tried to do today, just talking directly about the issue, so it doesn't cause any confusion for them. So it could be using the word say died instead of gone to sleep. Which may bring more questions about what they've gone to sleep. What does that mean? When are they waking up? When are they coming back? Just being quite clear about what it is that has happened. And some strategies that people may use to cope. One big thing is just, as we said, that acknowledging and appreciating that grief will always be there. It's not forgetting about that person. It can be really important to remember them and have ways to remember them and keeping that connection. So whether that's planting a flower or a tree somewhere in their memory, getting a bench back in their memory and having that space you can go to. It could be creating a journal together or individually about positive memories you have about things maybe you did together, maybe music you listened to, places you went to. Just sharing those positive memories and writing them down. You could also do that with looking at photographs or creating a little memory box that maybe has memories and photographs in. And that you can turn to if you do say you want to be in that sort of, in that reflective, remembering nostalgic sort of mind frame. Knowing you can turn to that and open that box if you wanted to. And also just talking together about the shared memories doesn't have to be creating something, making something, or writing something. It could just be sitting down at one time, maybe over tea or having a meal, and just sharing memories and just talking about what's happened. It could also be with drawing or art, because appreciate words can sometimes be really difficult to pinpoint or express kind of what is happening, what we're feeling. So that can also be done with, say, drawing or art as well. And in terms of expressing those feelings and thoughts, that can be something that's really important to do. Otherwise it can be really difficult and it can just snowball and build up inside us. So finding a way to express those somehow can be really helpful, whether that is art, whether that is writing. Writing a letter to the person that's died, so maybe things you wish you could say or did say. And you don't necessarily have to share it with them if they or with anyone. Could be something that's private and personal to you. Just getting those thoughts out and expressing those. And again, it can be important to talk with the young person, just to consider actually what do they want to happen with this piece of artwork, with this piece of writing? Do they want to share it with anyone, with someone, or do they want to keep it to themselves? Do they want to shred it, bin it, burn it? What would they want to do with it? Giving them that control and that choice.
Yeah, and so just following on from that, so some other kind of ideas of how we can look after ourselves. So maybe creating a soothing or a safety calming box. So for a lot of people, like really sensory objects, so maybe things like fidget toys or a teddy bear, a little fleecy blankie maybe, anything in there that's going to be, in those moments of really heightened distress. It's like, I just physically need to hold something right now. We could put things related to the person who has died. We could put them in that box as well. So maybe whilst we're holding our teddy bear or we've got our fidget toys, we could have a photo of that person. Everything just in one place, because sometimes when we're feeling a bit overwhelmed and we know that things are kind of like scattered everywhere, it can be a bit too much. If we've just got it in one place, it's like, okay, I know where I'm going. All my things are in this one box. I can get into that sense of, okay, I can start to just bring it down a little bit now. And just thinking about self-care as well. Obviously when something, as hugely devastating as a bereavement happens, our normal sense of how we would look after ourselves tends to go out the window because, like we said before, we just go into that survival mode. So just recognizing, what do I normally like to do with my time? Do I like watching Netflix? Do I like doing some painting or some craft? Or do I like taking the dog out for a walk? So just recognizing, okay, I need to really look after myself during this period. And thinking, if this happened to a friend, what would I suggest to a friend? I would certainly want them to look after themselves. So just trying to show ourselves some of that compassion as well. We've got here as well about a jar of strengths. So sometimes when we find ourselves in these really difficult situations, we can be so overwhelmed to the point of thinking, I can't cope with this anymore. This is beyond me. This is too big for me. I can't do this. And just that sense of a reminder of who you are. As Emma was saying before, it might feel like we're losing our sense of identity. Who am I anymore? So just writing down maybe, on a little piece of paper, some of the really, good things about you, putting them in a jar, and then in those moments when it's like, I can't cope with this, just going and pulling out the jar. Okay, yeah, actually, I am really funny. I am really, creative. I do like doing things like this. And it can be really nice to do this with teenagers. And we can say to them, tell me 5 really cool things about you. Let's write those 5 cool things down. Actually, I remember when you did so and so, and I thought that was really awesome. Let's write that down on a piece of paper. We'll pop it in the jar. When you need a little pick me up, we'll go and get that little memory and read through it. And it'll just help to lift our spirits. And just a reminder of you're still the same person. You're still in there. your identity is still there. It's just a bit overwhelmed right now. And we've got here as well about sticking to a sense of routine. Like we said before, we go into that survival mode. Everything goes out the window. We're just doing whatever we can to get to the end of the day. And when we are going through these kind of difficult times, that sense of reassurance, we need stability, we need control over something. So we might have the kind of teenager who really doesn't like routine. They like, they kind of go with the flow. They do things as and when feels good for them. But when something like a bereavement happens, it might be helpful to think, would it be good for us to have maybe a little bit of a stronger sense of routine right now? We don't have to stick to it forever. If you're a kind of easy breezy person normally, that's absolutely fine. But during this period, whilst we're kind of in the depths of our immediate grief, let's think about what could we do to try and structure our days a little bit better. We've got as well some relaxation and grounding techniques. Now, these are the kind of techniques that we teach to teenagers when we work with them in the appointments that we have. We can do something called finger breathing. So we will encourage teenagers to pop their hand up, finger from the other hand, base of their thumb, and then trace the outline of their fingers as they're breathing out. So we would say inhale, really nice and slowly, exhale, inhale, exhale. We've also got something called square breathing, where we will imagine a square and we'll breathe in and out in time with tracing this square. We also do something called nostril breathing, where we will cover alternate sides of our nose as we're breathing in and out. We can do something called balloon breathing, where we encourage people to really focus on where are they breathing from right now. Because when we do really fast, short, shallow breaths from the top of our chests, that kind of really encourages that. What we want to do is come down into our tummy, and we can do that by imagining a balloon and imagining the balloon getting bigger and smaller as we're breathing in and out. In terms of grounding, so trying to come back into the here and now, we sometimes play the five senses game in the appointments that we do. So we'll ask teenagers to go through their five senses. So seeing, hearing, smelling, touch, and taste, and just check in with them and just say, okay, what can you see around the room right now? Is there anything jumping out at you? Is there anything, particularly interesting in this room? What can you feel? What do your clothes feel like? What's your temperature like? What do your shoes feel like? What can you smell? What can you taste right now? And what can you hear? So can you hear the birds outside? And just tapping into those five senses is a really good way of coming back into the here and now. We also do muscle relaxations, where we will ask people to kind of tense their muscles, hold it for a couple of seconds, and then release, and just feel, really tap into what does that feel in your muscles right now. So all of these techniques, we do have individual videos on our Instagram and our Facebook accounts that can teach you how to do these in more detail. So yeah, take a little look at our social media. We've got all of these with a lot more detail.
And in terms of supporting yourself, I appreciate that you yourself has a really big part in this journey, as well as making sure, looking after yourself as well as a young person. So it could be things that the one big thing is self-kindness and understanding. As we said before, you can put a lot of expectation and pressure on ourselves to be doing and saying something and the right thing. And actually, we're all only human, and it's understandable if you are yourself are finding this time really distressing and really just confusing and scary, how you're feeling is okay as well. So just giving yourself that bit of understanding that it's just a really difficult time, but only human, all we can do and all we can ask of ourselves is just to try our best. That's all we can ever do. Seeking support from others if you need. Who is your own backup team? All the things we've spoken about in strategies, you can use yourself as well as a young person. It's for everyone. And so they're thinking about who is your backup team. Maybe it's friends, maybe it's work colleagues, maybe it's going to the GP or an organisation like us. Who is your backup team? And that could be something as well for yourself and the young person. You discuss together who is their backup team. Maybe if you don't feel able to talk at a certain time, who can they go to? And so you both have that reassurance. You've got your backup team, you've got each other as well, and they've got their backup team as well if needed. And as we said, all the strategies discussed can be applied to yourself as well as a young person. And in terms of routine, to give you and the young person routine as well, it can be important to have that structure and also to maintain kind of usual kind of boundaries and behavioural boundaries that you already have to give you and them that reassurance that that doesn't change. Yes, things may be quite overwhelming and difficult and adjustments may be made, but the general kind of boundaries and kind of the things that you have already set still exist. That doesn't change. So to give you and them kind of that space and reassurance that there is some kind of stability there in those sorts of things. And this may be later down the line that maybe you think about or consider these questions. But just a few questions to ask you to reflect really on your and on the process of grief and how your process of grief. So asking yourself, when do I think about the person or the cause of my grief? When do I think about that? Do I think about my loss less often than I used to? What things can I do to remind me of my loss without getting upset or distressed? What things can I do to make me happy or that to help me manage my grief and whatever feelings that may be coming up? Since the last, what new things have I learned about myself? Maybe it's I'm more confident than I thought, or independent than I thought. Maybe it's I'm more comfortable in asking for support than I ever thought, or I've kind of got used to that asking for support, and that's okay, and that it's okay to ask for help. Just what new things have you learned about yourself in that time? And again, it may be you write a response to these, it may be later down the line, and you think about what has changed for you, and think about again back over the time. And you may surprise yourself actually how far what you have achieved and how far you have come since that time. Because we can, as we said, it's so easy to just live on autopilot, get through day to day and get through life and not actually acknowledging what we are doing in a day and what we are achieving. So just giving ourselves those times to reflect and us, yeah, asking us to consider those questions.
Okay, so we wanted to finish now by signposting you to some other organisations. There are some fantastic bereavement organisations out there. So we just wanted to go through some of them with you. So the Loss Foundation is for anyone 18 plus who has suffered a bereavement due to cancer. The organisation Winston's Wish is for anyone from child up to the age of 25 who has experienced a bereavement. And also, you know, we've referred to them and had a couple of quotes from them today, but Child Bereavement UK are a fantastic resource. So we would really recommend having a little Google, finding those as well. So there is an organisation called Cruise Bereavement, and you might have heard of them kind of for their adult work, but they do also have kind of a young people's and children's arm to their work, which is called Cruise Bereavement Hope Again. So we would recommend having a look at those. There's also an organisation called Survivors of Bereavement by Suicide. That's for people aged 18 plus, but again, another really good one, and also the Good Grief Trust. We'll have links to all of these in the description box, but yeah, by all means, you know, they are fantastic and they're very specific to what we've been talking about today.
There are also general thing support organisations. So certainly like Young Minds, another mental health charity specifically for young people. They do, and there's lots of kind of resources and information on there as well that the young person can read through or you can read through together. There is a specific helpline for parents that's on the screen. You can contact them if you maybe have any questions or concerns about your young person. And there is a general number you can call as well for advice or to speak to someone. There is also parent support with the Charlie Roller Trust. They have a kind of a support network for parents. And there's other ones such as, say, Childline, which supports up to the age of 19. That could be an anonymous email support. It could be a phone call, and you can certainly ask advice. And there is also information on the website as well and resources, but you can certainly give their number a call. And there is also Couth as well, which is an online support service for young people. Could be kind of an online specifically all online support service that you can say it's messaging or calling them is all online. And just final thing in terms of next steps. So if you do need any immediate or crisis support, then please contact one of the organisations below. So it could be emergency services, so 999. Also helplines like the Samaritans, which are open all year round, all time round, so 24/7. And also papyrus, which are specifically for young people, and parents can call them as well if you have any concerns about the young person's safety. And even if it's not crisis, they are also helplines you can contact if you just want to speak to someone and just have a listening ear. And yeah, finally, just to say thank you all very much for watching and taking part in this information series one step at a time. And if you would feel that you would want any further information, whether it's about the organisation itself, whether it's about this session, then please feel free to get in touch with us, either by giving us a call or sending an email. But we really appreciate, thank you so much for you all taking the time to do this. So diolch, and thank you very much. It's been lovely to be here for you all.
Thank you, everybody.